Welcome to the Doggy Dojo. I'm your host, Susan Light, a Los Angeles-based dog trainer on a quest to become worthy of the title Sensei of the Doggy Dojo. I'm excited to be kicking off Season 2 with this guest. She's been involved in the rescue and shelter world since the mid-90s, so she's bringing a lot of experience and perspective to this delicate conversation. If you've ever tried to rescue an animal and been turned down, ghosted, or shamed for not being some kind of ideal candidate, or if you simply want to understand more about how shelters approach the adoption process from their end, give a listen. We're going to talk about some issues with all the rules rescues have for adopters, why no kill isn't as positive as it sounds, and why adopt don't shop isn't always possible, practical, or even desirable. She holds a Master of Science degree in animal behavior, is a certified professional dog trainer, and a certified dog behavior consultant. I'm so pleased to welcome to the podcast, Trish McMillan. Hi, Trish. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Susan. Thanks for inviting me to podcast with you.
I am super excited to have this conversation. I a little bit want to preface this for anybody that's listening. I'm a little bit worried people will think this is a controversial conversation because we may be saying some unpopular views. And we're certainly going to be talking about rescue organizations in a general way and, maybe our experience with some specific ones. So I just want to go out of my way to say at the beginning that this is not an attack on rescues. And obviously we think there's so many of them doing so much great work and have saved so many animals' lives. But I think this is a conversation worth having.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that we can improve on.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like there's a lot to unpack here.
Oh, for sure. Sourcing of pets of the future is something I think about a lot and a lot of my colleagues think about a lot because, we used to say, when we run out of shelter animals, when there are no more strays to place, we are going to lock our doors and go home and become, some type of other employee because we won't be needed anymore. And what a great day that will be. And now we're actually faced with it in some areas, not in North Carolina. We have lots of dogs here, but I don't know about your area of California, but I know Pacific Northwest. I know a lot of the Northeast. They're having to import dogs to meet the need for adoptions. And it's a great problem to have, but the shelters didn't just close their doors and walk away from used animal sales. They are importing animals from elsewhere. And something that keeps me up at night is, and what are we going to do when we run out of those? We're kind of victims of our own spay-neuter success, that we are running out of dogs. When I was a kid in Manitoba, we would let all of the dogs out in the morning. If it was not the middle of winter, they would run around, they would make puppies, they would come back. And the dogs who were producing puppies were, for the most part, dogs who had already succeeded as family pets. You could not keep a dog outside in Manitoba, so these were indoor house pets. And spay-neuter was not a big thing back in the 70s. Our dog was neutered, but I think he was one of the few. And I think what's happening now is if you're a responsible person and you have a nice dog, you will spay and neuter that dog. You will absolutely not make more like that. And if you are an irresponsible person and you've got a junkyard dog chained up in your car lot, or we've got a lot of coonhounds chained up behind residences here in North Carolina, and the dogs who are producing the puppies are not necessarily dogs who have already succeeded as family pets. So what we find in the shelters is kind of an oversupply of the types of dogs that irresponsible people have, and an undersupply of the dogs who come from the genetics of family pets. So I think this is something that we're all seeing as trainers. Like I talked to trainers
definitely
like 25 years ago. We would start a puppy class or an adult dog class. We would undo all the leashes, let the adult dogs run around the building, get their yayas out, put them back on leash and start the class. And I think about doing that now. There's not a lot of areas where you could do that. The dogs have become more difficult. And I think part of that is where they're coming from. And this is all just conjecture. I don't have, it's just what I've observed over the last 25 years. But we're also not euthanizing the dangerous ones anymore. We've got a lot of pressure from the no-kill movement and from people who have computers and want to make sure that all the dogs live, who put a lot of pressure on shelters and rescues. Get a board and train. You got to try another thing. You got to foster them. You got to try with dogs that we absolutely wouldn't have tried with 25 years ago.
Yeah. There's also a lot of pressure as trainers to quote unquote fix all these dogs.
Oh, yeah. If you have a shelter that never euthanizes for behavior, statistically, you are going to have more difficult dogs there. So if I have a friend who says, I want to go get a dog from a shelter, I would like to see where that shelter's position is on adopting out dangerous dogs. And if they are what I call a never not ever shelter, who keep every single dog alive for the rest of their life, statistically, you're going to have more difficult dogs there. Whereas if you go to a municipal shelter that's high intake, that does have to euthanize for behavior, or even if they have to euthanize for space, they're probably going to keep the nicest of the nice dogs. So I love helping people pick out dogs, and I wish more people would come to a trainer and say, come to the shelter with me and help me find one.
Me too. Or even just like pay for a half an hour of their time to talk about, what you're looking for and expecting for a dog. Do you know what I mean? Just to help pick a dog that's going to fit your lifestyle a little bit.
Well, and it's helpful to have somebody come along with you to talk you down if you're looking at a dog that is absolutely not suitable to your lifestyle, but you fell for their cute fuzzy face. Like if you have somebody with you who's yeah, you don't want that. They can sometimes talk you out of something that would be a poor match because, impulse adoptions, I've done it. I've fallen for cute fuzzy faces. But the advantage I have as somebody with a foot in the sheltering industry is I can take them home and test drive them and see if my other animals like them and see what they're like in the home. And that's one of the things that if somebody brings a dog back to the shelter, sometimes shelter people are very mean to them because it sucks to see that dog's face again. And we're like, how dare you? you said you would adopt forever.
You said you would love them forever. Yeah.
Yeah. And
I know most of the applications are like, would you ever return this animal for any reason?
And yet all of us in the shelter world regularly take animals home and test drive them and go, nope, and take them back the next day and try another one the next week. And we do this over and over and over, but because it's just an overnight foster, it's not a big deal. And I would like us to start looking at returns as overnight fosters. So if the dog comes back, and it tried to eat your cat. Didn't know it was a cat eater. We don't have cats at our shelter, so thanks for the information. Hey, how about taking a look at Lenny? He has lived in he came from a hoarder's house with 30 cats. I'm pretty sure he'll be okay with your cat. Like we can try to turn that into readoption, or at least be nice to them, and they might come back when they're ready. But if you're like, just think of returns as an overnight foster or a 1 week foster, and be nice to the people, get the information you need to place that dog correctly the next time. And there you go.
Yeah. I was going to recommend, cause we're about to talk about kind of the barriers and how hard it is sometimes for someone who desperately wants one to get approved for a dog or a cat that they want from a rescue. And I was going to suggest fostering or fostering to adopt, but I do know that some shelters hate that. Like they don't want you to foster when what you really want is to adopt.
Yeah,
so I think that
crazy.
Depends on the shelter and the rescue group as well.
Yeah, I do not love that policy. I was a victim of that policy in 2001 when I took home a little 4-week-old underage foster, just, 4 weeks, take her in, get her spayed. I thought it would be fun. And when I had her at home, she was just the smartest little puppy. And my 2 older dogs were like, please, Mom, can we keep her? And they don't like anybody. But they really fell for this little puppy. And I really liked her. And my old dog was getting kind of creaky. And I thought, maybe I should adopt her. But I knew that shelter did not adopt to fosters. So I was super sneaky. And I took her in for her spay and handed her over in the vet entrance and went home for the night and came back the next morning and went in through the adoption entrance. And the foster people weren't there. And I said, oh, do you have any puppies available? I'd like an 8-week-old female puppy. And they're like, oh, here's Kenya. She just came available at noon, and I'm there at 12:01 with my application all filled out.
Gosh, that worked out great.
Imagine that. But it's crazy. I had to go through this subterfuge to, it's not like I stopped fostering for that shelter. I kept fostering, and I had fostered for them before. She was just the only one that I wanted to keep, and I knew I couldn't because of that rule.
Yeah.
I'm sure
and some don't. Some only want the one animal. But I would still think that if, fostering a few animals until you found the animal you wanted to keep, in that animal had a home forever, would still be worth that rescue's time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think we should do more of that. And I think people are more likely to take a chance on a behavior dog or a medical dog if they're allowed to test drive it first. Because there's no strings attached. And what we're essentially asking people to do when we sit them in a room with a dog for half an hour and say, decide now if you want to spend the rest of your life with this animal, that is essentially an arranged marriage. We are saying, commit for life to this animal that you've known for half an hour, and you don't know what they're like at home, and you don't know what your kids think of them, and you don't know what your cat thinks of them, and you don't want to know if they're going to, bite the neighbors if they stick their fingers through the fence. Like, it's speed dating. It is instant marriage. And I think allowing people to take the dog home overnight, take them home for a week. One rescue that I got, I actually went back to them for 2 dogs and fostered quite a few for them, was a Doberman Rescue. And they did not allow you to take your resident dogs to meet the Doberman because Dobies can be a little picky about their friends. They gave you instructions on doing a slow intro, and you fill out the
neutral territory, maybe.
All the stuff, and you fill out the paperwork. You hand them a check. It's legally your dog. It's not like it goes into limbo, but they don't cash the check for 2 weeks. And if for any reason during that 2 weeks you're like, oh God, he's tried to eat my cat, or my old dog hates him, you take the dog back. No harm, no foul. They know a little bit more about the dog because now it's been in a foster home, and they can do a better placement next time, or a more appropriate placement. And I think it let a lot of people feel a little better about that arranged marriage, because it's, we can live together for a little bit first, make sure we're compatible.
Yeah. I filled out forms for rescue. They were like 3 pages, like long pages.
Yeah. I
feel like not all of it was necessary.
I have an in-law who has adopted a lot of children, and he once tried to adopt a small breed dog from rescue, and he told me it literally is easier to adopt a child. He got to like page 6 in their 6th personal reference, and he was like, you know what, I'm just going to buy one from a breeder, and he did. Yeah. So what happens with the adoption applications is you can tell everything you can see the whole history of the rescue in their adoption applications. You can see everything that's ever gone wrong. So if it says,
oh, good point.
Yeah. If it says no kids under 6, well, some dog went home and knocked over a kid, and the parent came back all mad, and okay, now no family can take a dog if they have a kid under 6. And if they have, you must have a 6-foot fence, which is common with Doberman rescues. I have a 4-foot fence. There's a Doberman Rescue that would not adopt to me because I have a doggy door. I have a doggy door to my whole farm that is fenced with a 4-foot fence, with a hot wire on top for the livestock, which is on if it needs to be. Clearly somebody got out through the doggy door, or somebody crawled in through the doggy door, and something bad happened. So that's a no for a lot of shelters. So you can kind of see everything that's ever gone wrong. But the problem with making rules by exception is that you end up with more and more and more rules every year. And I am currently without a Doberman. Mine died in June, but I know that there's not a Doberman Rescue within the neighboring 3 states that I can adopt from, because I've looked at their policies, and I could adopt from them if I lied. If I said, oh yeah, it's a 6-foot fence, and send a picture of my neighbor's 6-foot fence, I might be able to get one. But if I was truthful and told them about the lack of padlock on the gate, there are Doberman Rescues that will not let you adopt a male dog if you have a male dog at home, which I have, because there is sometimes same-sex aggression in Dobermans. I have not had that in any of my 4 Dobermans. So I think we start making rules because of the exceptions, and we think that's going to prevent bad stuff from happening. We think that's going to prevent returns. And I can tell you, it doesn't matter how crazy your adoption process is. Somebody's going to lie to you. Somebody's going to change houses and not have that 6-foot fence anymore. Somebody's going to drop a leash. Like, something bad stuff is going to happen, and we can't stop that. It's just life.
We're going to take a quick break. Remember, you can find Trish at her website, trishmcmillan.com. It's linked in the show notes.
So I favor a conversation-based adoption. This is something that happened when I worked for the ASPCA. I found one of my old adoption books from the 90s, and it was awful. Oh my God, I was so judgmental. And I wrote down, like, works too many hours, has an intact dog at home. Like, I was just looking for reasons to say no for the rescue I was working with. And when I started at the ASPCA, they do open adoptions. It's conversation-based, and you can't start with no. And you can't just look for red flags. You have to start with yes, and look for ways to make it work. And I was appalled. I'm like, how are we going to do this? Everybody's going to take these dogs and, abuse them. And you know what? That didn't happen. It just didn't happen. And we could say no, if they were under the influence of a substance. There were certain things that you could say no, but you had to call your boss in. Like, you couldn't just be the one. You had to, and my boss was very busy.
You had to have like a witness. Yeah.
Well, my boss was very busy, and I did not want to bother her for trivial things. So I learned a whole lot starting with yes. Like, I remember this woman coming in who was not a marathon runner. She was a little older and, clearly not going to be out jogging the dogs for hours every day. And the dog she fell for was a Labrador mix who she said looked exactly like her old dog. Like, you were 15 years younger when you got your old dog.
Aww.
And I'm thinking this, but I'm not allowed to say no. So I said, well, he's one of our most hyper dogs. He really likes to run. He likes to play. He likes to fetch. How can we make a plan for him so that he can succeed in your household? Because I was obliged to say that. And in the back of my mind, I'm like, he's coming back tomorrow. He's going to eat her house and run her off her feet and drag her down the road. But we made a plan, and she had a doggy daycare nearby, and she had stairs in her apartment building that she could play fetch on. And we just made a plan and set her expectations. Like, how are we going to meet the needs of this high energy dog? We talked about chewing enrichment and feeding toys, and sent her home with enough walking equipment to control him. And you know what? Nice. I never saw that dog again. I was sure he'd be back the next day. I was so sure. But I had a bunch of experiences like this where I had to stuff my judgment down in my throat and just like, don't say it, and look for solutions. And sometimes when you do that, they'll be like, oh, I didn't know he needed that much exercise. What else have you got? And I could guide them towards an easier dog.
Yeah. And I think that's for me, a huge one that I get here in LA, which maybe isn't a big deal in North Carolina, but here there's so many apartment dwellers. And I always see these posts for dogs that are like, needs a backyard, needs a backyard, needs a backyard. They're like, won't adopt to anybody that doesn't have a backyard. And although some apartments do have access to a backyard, it's basically, you're talking about someone with a single family home, which in Los Angeles is somebody that's pretty wealthy to have that dog. But just letting your dog out in the backyard is not good exercise.
Well, I think this is kind of a proxy for wealth. I don't know that it's really about the backyard. I think we don't want poor people taking our dogs. And that's something that the industry needs to look pretty carefully at. I think we need to take a good look at that and have a conversation. Like, this is an energetic dog. How are you going to get him his exercise?
Yeah. And that's not a walk around the block.
No.
Because that's another thing. Everybody's like, oh, I took him on a walk. It's like, for them, that's not exercise.
Well, that's why people buy French bulldogs, because they can only go around the block once.
Yeah. So I think some of these requirements come from like a good intention of saying, we need to meet this dog's needs. They're just judging that this is what will meet this dog's needs. So I'd love to see shelters, like you said, and rescues take a more coming from, yes, like this this is what we think this dog needs. Can you give it to them? Not just like, oh no, you don't have a backyard. Oh no, you don't have someone that works from home. Because that's another one I'm seeing a lot. They're actually requesting only people that work from home to adopt certain dogs.
Well, the first shelter I went to get a dog was in 1989, and I was finishing up my first degree, and I had a job on a horse farm for the summer, so I thought I'll just adopt a dog. My roommates were cool with it, and take it to the farm for the summer, and it'll have a great life, and I will keep this dog till it dies of old age. And I went into the shelter, and actually I didn't even go in. I called to find out what I needed to bring in. Like, you need my driver's license, you need my lease, what do you need? And they're like, oh, you're a student. We don't adopt as students. They didn't ask, like, are you graduating in 2 months? They just said no students. And I was also occasionally away from home for more than 4 hours a day. And their law was nobody can have one of our dogs if they're ever away from home more than 4 hours at a time. And they didn't ask, do you have 2 roommates who love dogs who would walk the dog at lunch on your long day at school? No, they were just, you're a student. You are away from home occasionally. And the conversation didn't get past that. It was just like, bye. So I didn't go into the shelter. That shelter was later shut down for hoarding 1,000 animals in the space meant for 400, by the way. God. That was
because they wouldn't give them to anybody.
Many years later. It wasn't like the same week or anything, but that's kind of what happened. So I worked on the horse farm with no dog, and I moved to the West Coast with no dog, and I got a place on the West Coast that allowed dogs, and I bought a dog from a breeder. I did not even look at a shelter on the West Coast because I had been treated so badly.
You had a bad experience, yeah.
Yeah, and every time you say no to somebody, like I occasionally start like a 1,000-post thread on my on my page and ask people, have you ever been turned down for adoption? And boy, like that was 1989, and I am still telling that story.
Man.
And I'm not blaming.
It's so unreasonable, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they did not know that I had been training and showing horses my whole life. They did not know that I had always been the one to look after all of the family pets. They did not know that the family dog was exclusively trained by me when I lived at home. Like they didn't ask any of those questions. They just said, oh, students, you guys all give up your dogs when you move on at the end of the year. So no. Yeah. And that dog I bought from the breeder lived with me in 2 countries, several states, 2 provinces, and she did agility, she did obedience, she did therapy dog work, and she died in my arms at age 13. And that could have been a shelter dog's life, and they said no.
That's crazy. Another blanket one that some people turn down is military, because they assume that they're too nomadic, that they're going to be moving around too much. And then seniors, or some of them have policies only seniors for seniors. Yeah,
because seniors all have lots of money for the vet bills that go with having a senior dog every 2 years that dies on you. Yeah, I don't understand that.
Saying they can't have a puppy because you're likely to die soon is like ridiculous. Any of us could die at any moment.
I mean,
you know,
I lived with a woman in her 70s who had a couple of poodles, and she had plans for those poodles. She had arranged with the shelter that if nobody in her circle stepped up to take the poodles, they had a place to go. And she did indeed die a little bit too young, and I ended up with one of the poodles, and he was a great dog. But she had a plan for them.
Yeah.
And we should all have plans for them.
Anyone should have. Absolutely. Yeah. And I have heard of people, rescues or shelters, requiring for you to have a will.
Wow.
To get an animal.
Well, and again, that's a proxy for money, because I just made a will, and it was not cheap.
Yeah. I think my will I made when I got married, and I got it off the internet. I don't even know if it's legal, but it was like, sign it here. Yep. There you go. But yeah, I know if you try to adopt a turtle, that makes a lot of sense. Turtles will probably outlive you. Parrots, yeah. So those, but there's some shelters that have just sort of latched onto this and been like, you need to make sure that there's somebody to take care of them when you die. Probably, like you said, they got too many animals turned over when their owners died.
Yeah, and that's why we have shelters. Like, is that the worst thing in the world that the animal ends up at the shelter? Like, we're supposed to be the good guys, right? We're supposed to be a good, nice, soft place for them to land. Yeah, so I think we need to be a lot less judgmental. I really like the conversation-based adoptions. I look at the policies. Like, if you go to the adoption application and look at what they're asking for, it may give you an idea whether it's a conversation-based adoption or whether they're looking for reasons to say no.
Yeah. Yeah. And a good way to sort of, if you have time for it, to feel it out is obviously to just get involved with the rescue. Get involved, volunteer 1 day a week, and they can know you a little bit.
And you're more likely to get to do a foster to adopt if they know you. And you're more likely to see the easy dogs as they come in and be able to put your name on them. Yeah. So that can be a way to jump the line for sure.
A big commitment, but a great way. And even if you only helped out for 6 months or a year, like they need help. They all need help.
I mean, go for an hour a week and walk some dogs and you're in. So as far as getting...
Or make your teenager go.
If they allow teenagers.
It's like good for their college application. To some of them, you have to be 18 probably, huh?
It depends on the shelter. Yeah. Some of them have youth programs. I like child labor, but not all shelters allow it. But
we all did it.
They don't mind stuffing Kongs and making busy boxes.
That's the end of this week's episode, but not the end of my conversation with Trish. Tune in for part 2 when we'll discuss what to consider if adopting hasn't worked out and you're looking for a breeder. Something new I'm trying in season 2 is a quick wrap-up of the major points that stick with me from my conversation with my guest. And this week's big takeaways are, it's a myth, or at least a misconception, that where you get your dog, a rescue or a breeder, and at what age, as in you raise it from a puppy or you adopt it from an adult, is a major determining factor in its temperament and its chances for success as your family pet. Included in this myth is it's all in how you raise them. As Trish says, good dogs and problem dogs can come from anywhere. And a few things we could shift in the rescue world. 1, make it easier to return or surrender dogs and remove the stigma from doing so. It's better for everyone when dogs don't stay in homes where they're not being successful. And 2, let's stop using and promoting these catchphrases, adopt, don't shop, and no kill, which are too simplistic and don't take into account many, many factors where these aren't the best options. Trish gave me some great resources that are linked in the show notes and on my website. Be sure to check them out. Thanks for coming to the dojo to learn with me this week. This is your aspiring sensei, Susan Light, signing off. If you'd like to find me, I'm at doggydojopodcast.com or I'm at Susan Light LA on Pinterest, Instagram, and Facebook. The music was written by Mac Light. You can find him at maclightsongwriter.com. If you liked the show, you can support it by subscribing, sharing it with your friends, rating it, and reviewing it on Apple Podcasts. See you in 2 weeks with another new episode of the Doggy Dojo.